Now, last week we were starting to get to understanding what Babylon was, but we didn't quite get there. Tonight we're going to looking at Babylon, because up to this point, our introduction to Babylon in the book of Revelation has just kind of been in passing. And what I mean by that is you get like one of the three angels saying, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon," and that's kind of it. And it probably passes, and another mention of Babylon. But now, in chapter 17, which we're going to look, we get Babylon. We get to understand what Babylon actually is. Now, this chapter, we're going to read it here in a second, is actually divided into two sections. It's divided into an image, if you want, of it, almost like a vision of it. But it's not quite vision, if you understand what I mean here. It's a little different. And then we get an explanation, but the explanation isn't even complete. But this shouldn't be such a surprise to us, given the fact, if you were with us when we studied the book of Daniel, this is exactly what had happened. So like if you remember Daniel chapter 7, it's like, and there were four beasts, and here's the first beast, a lion with eagle's wings, and then going on, it doesn't exactly tell you what it is. It just simply tells you that it represents Babylon, or in that case, Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon, the empire. Without actually telling you much more than that. And then it said, the leopard, and after them another empire will rise, then after them another empire will rise. It doesn't give the direct details. The only reason we know the direct details is we can line it up with history. And that was part of the reason of studying Daniel first, because we're like, oh, we can match that up. That's already taken place. Where Revelation is yet to take place. Unless you're somebody who holds to preterism, but I have my own problems with that one. If you're not familiar with preterism just believes that everything in Revelation has already taken place. It was fulfilled around 70 AD, and they believe the book of Revelation was written in the 60s, and it was just talking about the judgment and the destruction of the temple. And they'll even say that Jesus came back the first time back then as well. And then you've got the other group that says it was all fulfilled, but the only thing we're really waiting for now is Jesus to return, and we're actually in the millennial kingdom now, kind of thing. That's, you got to imagine, they have to spiritualize everything, a lot of it. And as I've shown, I don't think the text allows spiritualization to that extent. And as I said, I studied the early church fathers, and the ones closest to the actual disciples, they all held that this was a future event. And so if it was past, there's no reason for them to say, hey, this is yet to come. They would have said, no, this is what it was. It'd be very strange for them to be in the same time period and not come to the conclusion. So with all that, I mean, the reason I go through all that in a little bit, with a little bit of a side, is as we study Babylon, we're stuck in the phase where we're not quite sure what it actually is. And what I mean by that is, although they can guess, and we'll look at some of the guesses of what this is, there's no way to be 100% sure until it takes place. We don't get the advantage of Daniel this time saying, hey, that happened then, and this is the fulfillment, and so now here we are. So we're kind of stuck behind that a little bit. But before we go, let's, I'm probably going to read all the chapter just to get the context before we go any more. So Revelation chapter 17. It says, then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and talked with me, saying to me, come, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication. So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, which was full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and adored with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the filthiness of her fornication. And on her forehead a name was written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and the abominations of the earth. I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I marveled with amazement. But the angel said to me, why did you marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and the 10 horns. The beast that you saw was and is not, and will ascend out of the bottomless pit and go to perdition. And those who dwell on the earth will marvel, whose names are not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they see the beast that was and is not, and yet is. Here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. There are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other one has not yet come. And when he comes, he must continue a short time. The beast that was and is not is himself also the 8th, and is of the 7, and is going to perdition. The 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings, who have received no kingdom as yet, but they receive authority for 1 hour as kings with the beast. These are of one mind, and they will give their power and authority to the beast. These will make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them. For he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those who are with him are called, chosen, and faithful. Then he said to me, the waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. And the 10 horns which you saw on the beast, these will hate the harlot, and make her desolate and naked, eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. For God has put it into their hearts to fulfill his purpose, to be of one mind, and to give their kingdom to the beast, until the words of God are fulfilled. And the woman whom you saw is that great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. All right, as I said, it's probably an inadequate explanation for us. We would prefer is like, hey, this is what it actually means. But we don't get that. But as I said, as we studied Daniel, if we weren't on this side of history, we would have the same thing. We'd be like, what does it mean? But as we see, once it took place, it's like, we know exactly what it means. So for instance, in Daniel 9, Daniel 8, sorry. Daniel 8 talks about 2 main beasts of the beast. It talks about the ram with 2 horns and a goat with 1 horn. And then it says the ram went to and fro with 1 horn being bigger than the other and did whatever it wanted until it ran into the goat with 1 horn, which then charged and crashed, breaking the 2 horns. Nobody could oppose the goat. Then the horn suddenly fell off and 4 more horns grew up. And then the horn to the south grew its own little horn who spoke blasphemies against heaven. And then it's just like, okay, that's nice. What does any of that mean? And as I said, since we're on this side of history, we can actually understand that the two-horn ram was the Medo-Persian Empire. 1 horn was bigger than the other, the Medes. And they were finally defeated after they did what they wanted. They were defeated by the Greek Empire under Alexander the Great. He conquered them. He died of illness, not in battle. And when he died, his kingdoms were divided into 4, his 4 generals. And in the south, a little horn came up. That was Antiochus Epiphanes, or Antiochus IV. But like I said, because we're on this side of it, we can go, I know what it is. But here we are in the middle of it going, okay, this sounds kind of strange. So what exactly is it? And so we do get some clues, but to understand this, there's one thing we understand. The woman represents Babylon. And we have to understand Babylon to get this. The very first reference to Babylon is in Genesis. It's all the way back in Genesis. And where does it start? Genesis chapter 11. So we're going after the flood. Directly after the flood, then chapter 10 is what's called the League of Nations. You know, the descendants of Noah, they split off into their locations kind of thing. But chapter 11, it starts to mention some people. And I'm just looking, but before that, I want us to back up to chapter 10, verse 8. Okay? This is where it's really going to start. Cush begot Nimrod, and he was a mighty one on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. And the beginning of his kingdom, and look at the first city, was Babel. Then Echad, Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. And from that land he went to Assyria and built Nineveh, Rehoboth, Ir, Calah, and Resen between Nineveh and Calah, that is the principal city. And that's just a description of Nimrod. Nimrod seemed to be it says mighty hunter, but think of him like a warlord. He conquered land. He gathered up. And his lead city, what was his main city that he was called? Babel. What do we know about Babel? This is where chapter 11 comes in, because it's an important event. Now the whole earth each had one language and one speech, and it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. Then they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They had bricks for stone, and they had asphalt for mortar. And they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower, whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth." Now that's an important detail. Why is that such an important detail? Well, because if you go back to the covenant that God made with Noah, what was the commandment that God told Noah to do? Back in chapter 9, verse 7. This is not a mistake. It's a repeat of something earlier in the scriptures. "And as for you, be fruitful and multiply, bring forth abundantly in the earth and multiply." What were they supposed to do? Populate and spread out. Babel, the very first city that Nimrod builds, what does he do? He builds a tower and says, "We're going to stay right here. Nobody's going to move us." Do you ever wonder why they wanted to build the tower to heaven? Do you ever wonder what they were after? It wasn't really about just making a name for themselves. Why do you think they would want to build a tower that was that high? There's a really practical reason for this. How did God wipe them out the first time? A flood. What are they trying to build? Get above the waters. You got to remember, this is one of those things that I think the flood narrative we kind of mix in our mind. We almost tend to think that the rain came, the waters come up, and everyone just died. No, what would people be doing? Yeah, trying to get up, going up mountains, climbing trees, climbing up as high as they can. They're like, no, we're going to build something that is sturdy enough to hold that we can get all the way up there. What is the first thing Babel is doing? And it sets the tone for Babylon from then on out. Go against God. Disobey God, a name for themselves. That's Babylon. And all throughout the scriptures, this language is used. Now, when we say, is this place is no doubt it's going to be a city. Why do I say that? I'm going to be jumping here a little bit instead of looking at everything. Revelation 17, verse 18. "And the woman you saw," so that's the same woman, "is the great city." Now this is important. It's a city. Now why is this so important? Because remember I said something about the dragon, about Satan. He can never create. He can only imitate and corrupt. That's all he can do. He has his unholy trinity. Himself, the beast from the sea, and the beast from the land. That's his unholy trinity. He can't bring back people from the dead. So what does he do? He has one that looks like it has been wounded, as if it had been killed. It had suffered a mortal wound, yet lived. Despite what some people in dispensation want to hold, they want to, oh, well, he died and he's going to come back to life like 3 days later like Christ. Yet there's no evidence of that. And interesting, one of the biggest proponents of that, again, you'd have to look at like the Left Behind series. But when I studied the earlier writings of Tim LaHaye, the theological backbone to it, Jerry Jenkins was the writer, LaHaye was the theology of it. His early work even points out that never before in history had Satan ever been able to raise the dead. So God's going to have to give him special permission to do this. So even he acknowledges that Satan doesn't have the power. So he's corrupting it. He imitates and he corrupts. At the end of the book of Revelation, what comes down? The New Jerusalem, God's city, the true city that's going to rule over the nations. And in this city, there's a temple, and in that temple, there is God. It's where he rules from. And the healing of the nations is there. People are going to come to it. It's like a pilgrimage. Satan can't create on his own. He copies and corrupts. What does he have? If God has his holy city, what does Satan have? Yeah, his Babylon, his corrupt city. So he has his own city, but is it called Babylon? Is it really called Babylon? Look at verse 5. And written on her forehead was a name written, Mystery Babylon. Now, depending on your translation, they may throw a comma in there. Mystery Babylon. That's a theological statement, not a translation statement. And that happens sometimes in the scriptures. This is one of the toughest things when I'm learning languages like Hebrew. There's no punctuation sometimes. So you got to go, okay, where's the punctuation? And sometimes punctuation can change the meaning of a statement entirely. A classic example of this is, what does Jesus say to the thief on the cross?
Today, comma.
Yeah, I tell you today, I tell you, today you'll be with me in paradise. Or to say, I tell you today, you will be with me in paradise. Those are two different statements, and they change the meaning, just depending on where you put the comma. Because one is, I tell you, today you'll be with me in paradise. That means on this very day, you and I are going to be in paradise. The other one is, I'm telling you today. You're facing death, but I'm telling you today, you will be with me in paradise. You see the difference in the meaning? One is saying right now, and the other one's saying, this is a sure thing. I'm making sure you're facing this, but don't worry, the end result is this. And so when you face with this, it's like, what's written on her? Mystery. And then her name, Babylon the Great. Or is it Mystery Babylon the Great? In other words, her name is Mystery Babylon with the title The Great. And that becomes an important detail as well. Why? Because if it's just Babylon the Great, then the city is named Babylon. If it's Mystery Babylon, it means it's something more. It may not be named Babylon, but it has all the features of Babylon. And remember, we're not talking just Nebuchadnezzar's capital city here. That's why I took you all the way back to Nimrod. It means it's a city that is contrary to God. And how does it do that? Well, let's look at some of the language that it's used in here, shall we? The first thing that it says about her, come, I will show you judgment of the great harlot. That's what he calls her. That's 17 verse 1. The great harlot. She's a prostitute. Now, why use such a language? This is where you've got to understand the Old Testament quite a bit. And let's go. I'm trying to make sure I want the right one here. No, I don't have it. Boastful, power, violence. I wrote my references here. Not that one. That's not the one I want. Oh, there it is. I'm going to go... Let's go Ezekiel. Ezekiel 16. Let's try there. Now, there's 3 spots to kind of understand this. I just don't know if I want to read them all. Ezekiel 16, Ezekiel 23, and Jeremiah 51. 16 is where we're going to start. Ezekiel 16. Because I want us to understand why he called her a prostitute. Yep, that's where I'm going. Verse 15. Verse 15 is talking about Jerusalem. This is the context, okay? Jerusalem, Jerusalem. So I'm going to put your finger at 15 because I'm just going to go back to verse 1 just for a second just to give you the context. Again, the word of the Lord came to me saying, Son of man, cause Jerusalem to know her abominations. So he's talking to Jerusalem, the city, the capital city. So verse 15. But you trusted in your own beauty. You played the harlot because of your fame, and poured out your harlotry on everyone passing by by who would have it. And so you took on some of your garments and adored multicolored high places for yourself, and played the harlot on them. Such things should not happen nor be. You have also taken your beautiful jewelry from my gold and my silver, which I had given you, and made for yourselves male images, and played the harlot with them. It's kind of an interesting image, isn't it? That he's talking about a city playing a harlot. But there's purpose behind this. If I'm right, I think Ezekiel 23 is a lot more graphic in its imagery. But let's go to Ezekiel 23. And we're going to pick this up. So this is where the Lord is upset with Samaria and Jerusalem, the two capital cities. It says, the word of the Lord came again to me, saying, Son of man, there were two women, the daughters of one mother. They committed harlotry in Egypt. They committed harlotry in their youth. Their breasts were their embraced. Their virgin bosoms was their breast. Their names are Ola, and the elder Olabah, her sister. They were mine. They were born sons and daughters. As for their names, Samaria is Oholah, and Jerusalem is Oholibah. So you know he's talking about Samaria. He's talking about Israel and Judah, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. Olahah played the harlot even though she was mine. And she lusted for her lovers, the neighboring Assyrians, who were clothed in purple, captains and rulers, all of them desirable young men, and horsemen riding on horses. Thus she committed her harlotry with them. All of them choice men of Assyria, with all for whom she lusted. With all their idols she defiled herself. Now I'm going to go down just to verse 11. Now, although her sister Olabah saw this, she became more corrupt in her lust than she, and in her harlotry more corrupt than her sister's harlotry. She lusted for the neighboring Assyrians, captains and rulers, clothed in majesties, horsemen riding on horses, and all of them desirable young men. Then I saw that she was defiled. Both took the same way. But she increased her harlotry. She looked at men portrayed on the wall, images of Chaldeans portrayed in vermilion, girded with belts around their waist, flowing turbans on their head, all of them looking like captains, in the manner of the Babylonians and Chaldeans, the land of their nativity. As soon as she saw them, she lusted for them, and sent messengers to them in Chaldea. Then the Babylonians came to her into the bed of love, and they defiled her with their immorality. So she was defiled by them and alienated herself from them. She reveled in her harlotry and uncovered her nakedness. Then I alienated myself from her as I'd alienated myself from her sister. Okay, the picture here, as strong as that is, what is happening there is a different looking at the history of Israel and Judah. Israel of the northern kingdom, when Jeroboam took over, he started with being afraid that people would still go to Jerusalem to worship, and he's afraid that they would switch kingdoms, kind of thing, switch masters. So he built in Samaria a high place where they could come and worship. Because of their wickedness and idolatry, they eventually were conquered by the Assyrians, and they assimilated into Assyria and started worshiping their gods. The southern kingdom of Judah, they saw this. They adopted some of the gods, but they didn't stop there. What did they do? They went on to Babylon. Babylon conquered them, and they took over and started worshiping the Babylonian gods. So when God starts talking about this idea of harlotry, what it's referring to is worship that what should have been his, they should have been faithful to him, yet they have chosen to worship another, be it false gods, be it wherever. And so when you start here with Babylon, she's the harlot. In other words, she originally should have belonged to God, but what is she doing? She's having all the kings of the earth, all the peoples of the earth come and engage in worship. Now, let's put that in the context of what is happening at that time, this time in history. Babylon is a great city. What does this city entitle? Well, based on the fact that it's called Mystery Babylon, and she's called a harlot, I'm going to probably go not too far on a limb here and say this is where the beast from the land, the false prophet, has set up the major image of the beast. And this is where they would have to come and worship. This is going to be a center of worship for a while. Now, it could be that, or the other idea is here, that it, at that time, before this takes place, it could be a center of a universal worship. In other words, a pure ecumenical location. And it's propped up by the beast, by the government in that aspect. Now, either of those explanations can be valid. Which one is true, we won't know until it takes place. That's kind of how it works in this case. And you're like, but wait a minute, if it was the false prophet set up, you got to remember eventually, if this is where I think it's happening in our timeline near the end, the Antichrist, by that point, the beast from the land, or the beast from the sea, has gone even more rogue. He's gone more power hungry, more obsessed, that he will no longer be satisfied with people going to a city. He'd want them to worship him and him alone. And so this Babylon becomes the religious center of it all. And at that time, it makes it clear that it's everybody who comes. The great harlot who sits on many waters, whom the kings of the earth commit fornications, and the inhabitants of the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornications. So this is a case that it's encompassing everybody. It's making it clear the royalty will come and the lower will come. Now, I'm going to pause here for a second because throughout history, they've always tried to determine what is this mystery Babylon. And they try to line things up. And so some have tried to line up, it's no surprise here, that it's Rome and the Roman Empire kind of thing. The center of worship, center of emperor worship, that kind of thing. And others have looked at Jerusalem itself, saying Jerusalem is the one, because why? Well, what did we read earlier? Jerusalem was the harlot, that kind of thing. Modern day, if you look more modern day, and by then I'm talking like even 1500s to even now, if you want to call that modern day, they will say that things like New York City is the great Babylon. Why? Because it sits on waters and the ships have to go there. It's a business center and the UN has its headquarters there and things like that. Others have said Los Angeles, Hollywood. Look at all the perversion and everything that comes out of it. So like that's Babylon. Some have just said it's completely the United States as well. Others have argued, and this is where you can find like in the 1500s, that it's modern day Rome. Why do I separate those? Because I'm thinking Roman Empire. Now we're talking Rome, the center of the Roman Catholic Church. When it's looked, because why? It's like, well, look, it says it's 7 hills. She sits on 7 hills. These are in the description. Rome is built on 7 hills. She's wearing purple and scarlet. What do the leaders of Rome wear? Purple and scarlet. The kings of the earth come to her. Take a look. Pretty much every president and leader, where do they end up at one time? Before the Pope. They'll kiss his ring. They bow down. Like, see, it's like this would be the Babylon. Is it possible? Sure. It is. It is completely possible. And as you go on, you continue to see, and this Pope's no different. I saw a video of it just the other day, where they try to continue to merge, we'll say, the 3 biggest religions in the world into one. Where they try to merge Christianity, Judaism, and Islam into one. Trying to claim that, hey, they're all good. They're all the same. We can worship together. We can do this. And they blend together. Pope John Paul II, he had an ecumenical meeting back then, and he had everything from Islam, their religious leaders there, to the Buddhist leaders there, to snake handlers there. And he had no problem in allowing them to lay their scriptures right on top of what would be the altar of God. Then when they look at, she's drunk with the blood of the saints in one spot, and they're like, well, do you see how the Catholic Church in its history persecuted the Protestants and other Christians? They'd execute them if they didn't repent and bend in and that kind of thing. And you can make a pretty strong case in that way. He's going, hey, look, it seems to line up. And so they claim that they're worshiping God, yet, despite what they want to think, there is documents in their catechisms which are contrary to the scriptures. And they just like to play fast and loose with words at times, kind of thing. But as I said, it's a case of you can't be 100% sure. Like I said, Martin Luther was one who was a proponent of Rome back in the Reformation, saying Rome itself fits the declaration here when he looked at what it was and all that. But what we really get here is that the most what you get is it's a city that is going to be so influential that the people of the earth are going to be central. It's going to be a center of religious worship, but it's not religious worship of God. It calls her the harlot, and drunken fornication. In other words, she's going to lead people away from the true and living God. She's leading them away from Christ. And it's everybody on the earth is going to be whose name is not written in the Lamb's book of life. That the delusion is that strong in that aspect. And it says everybody, she's got the cup of the filthiness of fornication. Her name is there. She is the mother of harlots. In other words, this is why it's not just possibly one city at a time. It's when it says Babylon, it's talking about all of Babylon throughout history. That Babylon itself became the euphemism for false worship. It became the euphemism for everything that was contrary to Christ when it came when it came to religious teachings, we'll put it that way. And that's why I said you've got Jerusalem that fits into it. At times you've got other cities that fit into it. It's all of them. And it started at the very beginning with Nimrod saying, this is what God said, but no, we're going to make a name for ourselves. And so when you look at all the false worship systems in there that are in the world today, in other words, when I say false, I'm talking anything that is not true in biblical Christianity that points to Christ. All of them are all under one banner. As different as they look, they're not. And in fact, when you really start to look at them, they're all the underlying, yes, they have some things different, but they all underline pretty much in one thing. Man works out his own salvation and his own righteousness. That's the way it has to be. So when you look at like Hinduism, the idea is you want to get out of this cycle of life and death. You do so by building up karma points. And if you build up enough karma points, when the next life comes around, you get to progress to the next level. And Buddhism is very similar to that, because Buddhism actually stems from Hinduism, except they just take out the millions of gods and say there is no God. That's a quick summary. But this is also why that religions, if those two religions, Hinduism and Buddhism, are held to their actual standard, this is why they have a caste system. This is why they have a bottoms, and you don't touch them. The uppers don't touch the bottoms. And you're going, why would that be? Well, because if it really is a system of karma like that, then when you see somebody who's born into poverty and somebody who's born at the lowest caste, what are you supposed to think? They deserve that because of their last life. They're getting justice. Now they've got to suffer in this life so that they can go to the next level. So when you see it, and that's a lot of them how they go. When you look at Judaism, what is Judaism trying to do? And Jesus had a problem with it. They're trying to earn their righteousness. You follow these rules, you do this, you pray this many times a day, you offer these sacrifices. They're trying to have their own righteousness at its core. When you run into Islam, what does Islam do? You're like, oh, they trust in Allah. Now you've actually got to look at it though. And they'll say Allah is merciful. But what do they actually mean by this? It's like, well, if you ask, do they have assurance of salvation? The answer is no. They say, well, we work and we keep the laws, we keep the 7 steps, we do as best we can, and then when we die, we hope Allah will be merciful and let us in. Now, when you look at Catholicism, what does Catholicism teach at its core? The exact same thing. You do the graces, you do your best you can, and you hope that you've done enough, that your good outweighs your bad, that you'll get in. And they've expanded that, obviously, where they added purgatory, where, well, if I didn't quite make the cut, well, I can spend some time in purgatory, as unpleasant as that'll be, but eventually I'll make it out, kind of thing. And I'll get to heaven. But it's very much work-based. What does biblical Christianity teach? I'm not good enough. No work that I can do is enough. So what can I do? Well, I can do the only thing I can. I can fall at the feet of Jesus and say, have mercy on me, a sinner. That's the only answer. And Jesus will say, yeah, with faith, we've accepted his grace through faith. Then you're his. And your name is written in the book of life. See, all the others, at their core, like it or not, despite the differences, at their core is man trying to earn salvation. With the true faith, we can't earn it. I'm pointing to Christ. And so you can see why true Christianity is going to be the problem. Because as many people, and that's what the argument people make. It's like, you're telling me that somebody who's done good their entire life, they gave to the poor, they looked after everybody, just because they don't believe in Jesus, they don't get to heaven? Now, there's problems with that, but the answer is yeah. I'm like, that's not fair. That's because they don't understand it. And so all these religions, why is it? They're all actually under one banner. There's only 2 banners. There's Babylon and there's Jerusalem. That's it. Now, when I say Jerusalem there, I'm not referring to the city-state Jerusalem. I'm talking to the New Jerusalem. That's all there is. God's kingdom or the beast's kingdom. And that's all there is. And so Mystery Babylon has been there from the beginning. But it's going to be manifest at that point in history with one actual city. And it's going to be a city that's filled. And here's the thing. Don't just think it's going to be filled with what you think of the most ungodly place. It may actually look on the outside from a fairly righteous place. I think there was a poem, you can look it up one time, it said, what do you think a city completely under Satan's control would look like? And most people would say, well, we think it'd be like the churches would be empty and closed down, that pornography would run our streets, sexual immorality, there was violence and stealing everywhere. Everyone's like, no, but I think it'd be the exact opposite. He says, I think the churches would be full. I think sexual immorality would be almost non-existent, crime would be non-existent. He said, but here's the difference. Christ would not be preached. Because that's what it would be like. It's like, why? Because when people are completely in their sin, they hit rock bottom, what usually happens? They're like, I need help. I can't do it. They suddenly realize, is there help? And then what's the Christian do? There is. Let me tell you about Jesus. But as I said this morning, who is the absolute hardest person to reach? The self-righteous. And so a place that says, you know what, I'm good. You tell me, I don't need it. I'm good. I've done this, I've done that. And so this Mystery Babylon may not be this place of like drunkenness, revelries, violence, and all that. It may actually look like a pretty good place to live. It's like no crime may be very small. But why? Because it's against Christ. It doesn't want people to. And this Babylon that has been so against Christ, well, it's going to get its judgment too. So that's what is promised. Next week we'll continue on because we really got a lot more to unpack here. Because as much as it talks about Babylon, it doesn't just talk about Babylon. It talks about this beast that it's riding, this beast that is propping it up. Because if you look, it doesn't say that I just saw a woman. It says I saw a woman riding a beast. And then it spends the next while not so much talking about the woman, but talking about the beast. And that's going to be a little rougher to get through because the imagery is a lot more complex than just the woman.